This is the third episode in our latest season featuring missing persons, unsolved homicides, and unresolved deaths across the United States, and the second in a two-part series. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are solely the interviewee's own. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This series discusses crime scenes in detail. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. Last time, we began our coverage of Shawna Toya, a 40-year-old mother of four who grew up on Jemez Pueblo. Shawna was a talented potter who continued her family's tradition of creating pottery with their signature rainflower pattern, and she also worked in healthcare, caring for people in their community. Her family recalls her as someone who brought joy into the lives of friends and even strangers, because Shawna was the kind of person who'd check on someone she saw in public who just seemed like they were having a bad day. She felt an urge to connect with others, even if it was just for a moment. She was also deeply devoted to caring for her four children and staying connected with her family. On July 31st, 2021, the Toya family celebrated Shawna's youngest sister's birthday at the Main Event Entertainment Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After bowling for hours, Shawna went home and took a bath because, as she told her mother, she was sore from the evening's activities. And around 11 p.m., she headed back out to run errands because she needed to get a money order for rent that was due the next day and to pick up milk for her kids. What should have been a routine trip became the last time that her family would see her alive. She was found unresponsive in her car at Phil Chacon Park in the early morning hours of August 1st. A devastating phone call woke her parents, Geraldine and Benjamin Toya, in the early morning hours, and their questions began almost immediately. When Shawna was released to the Toyas for burial, they observed a number of injuries they said were not noted in the report. And when they retrieved her car, they say they found evidence that police had not mentioned. Empty grocery bags with no groceries, missing cash, and the wallet of another woman. The family felt that this pointed to a possible robbery or other interference. And the Toyas tell us that this was just the beginning. There's been frustration and uncertainty on a number of issues, including communication with officials, changing timelines for obtaining reports, the unmet expectation that Shawna would receive a full autopsy, and a discrepancy found in the paperwork that they did receive. They say that all of this combined makes them certain that Shawna's case deserves another thorough review. That's where Darlene Gomez came in. She's the attorney and MMIP advocate who introduced us to the Toya family. And she's been fighting for justice in missing and murdered Indigenous persons cases across New Mexico and the United States for more than 2 decades. She's been working with the Toyas for several years and has helped them to gain media attention and arrange official meetings, including the one that we described in the last episode. Among all the evidence that the families documented, one discovery would become particularly significant. When the Toyas took possession of Shawna's car, Geraldine said they'd expected APD would want to retain it, but because her death was viewed as not suspicious, the vehicle was immediately released. So Shawna's father, Benjamin, drove the car home. When the family searched the vehicle more thoroughly, they discovered a stranger's wallet, and it contained several identifying items, like an ID. While they say they did alert authorities immediately as to the presence of this wallet, they didn't hear anything back, not for a long time. And what happened when authorities finally tracked down its owner? Well, that raised more questions than it answered.
They told me that they had found her, they questioned her, but then she's stating that somebody stole that from her. So she's claiming that she doesn't know anything about it. And then they believe her. They didn't really interrogate her or really get down to asking her more questions than that. But they said that they found her, it's according to them. She's claiming that her stuff was stolen and she didn't know where they were. So then when you think about it, if they were stolen, somebody that's around stealing and robbing people like that, why couldn't they say something did happen to Shawna?
The family has confirmed that no one they knew recognized the name of the woman whose identification was found in Shawna's car. Geraldine explained that Shawna, her boyfriend, and her children kept themselves as a close-knit family unit, and she could not imagine Shawna meeting anyone at that park. We don't have any information regarding phone records that might explain her movements after that shopping trip. The presence of the bags indicate that she did go to the store, but the items that should have been inside, they were missing, along with that $800 of rent money. To Geraldine, this underscores that at some point, someone else was in the car and stole from her daughter. Is that why she was still in the park so late at night? Could it be that she was robbed after she was incapacitated? They simply do not know. When Geraldine asked officials for explanations about the investigation, she said that she was repeatedly told that everything would be detailed in reports that were still being prepared. Geraldine said that she trusted this process and she waited for the promised documentation. But she told us that when she eventually received the paperwork, her questions were not answered. In fact, she had more. Geraldine said that the car remained parked at Jemez Pueblo while they continued asking the FBI about the vehicle and what they'd found in it. Basically, when agents might come out to finally see it. When that was addressed, she explained, she also gained a piece of new and unexpected information.
Then finally, around June 10th or 11th of 2022, finally, Denise and a couple of investigators drove here and dusted off the vehicle. And they went and scanned the documents, even the ones I wrote down, the officers' names, their badge numbers, the OMI report, the police report, all these things that she scanned. She said, "Did you see the gender part?" I said, "No." I said, "I went straight to what I wanted to know, what happened and why the cause of death." I said, "I saw her name on there, but I didn't, and then her birth date, but I guess I skipped the gender part. Just because I saw her name and saw her birthday and they were correct, I didn't look at anything else on there as far as her identity."
Geraldine told us that Shawna was listed as male rather than as female.
When I'm all like, "Oh my goodness," I said, it just upset at me. I'm all like, "Wow, how do we know that's really her report?" Yeah, it's her information. Everything's on there. So she calls them and they said it must have been a typo. That's all they said to her. And I'm all saying, well, if it's a typo, if they can make that mistake, how do we know it's really her information? There's nothing else on there. I said, it was just really simple. So she said she was going to look into it and all this. And then just about a year ago, I finally found out that Denise was no longer with them. So I don't even know if she would hand it down to anybody else because no one else called me.
One of the biggest mysteries for the Toya family is the toxicology results that they received in Shawna's case. We filed for a copy of these results for review, but received the response that no documents were on file. However, Darlene and the Toyas have been able to review them, and the Toyas have questioned the validity of the results, which normally would be difficult to challenge. But that gender error on her daughter's paperwork made Geraldine wonder if there were any mix-ups in the office. It was not just that error, though. It was also the series of events that preceded that moment that gave her pause. First, as we told you last episode, there were the different things that she heard regarding what kind of examination Shawna would have and the state of her body when the family received her remains. There's also what Geraldine said that she personally knew about Shawna. We do know that there was a bottle of alcohol in the car when Shawna was found, and liquor is sold at the store where she went to pick up her groceries that evening. But to our knowledge, there were no drugs or paraphernalia found in her car at the scene. That's actually one of the reasons, as stated in the body cam footage that we reviewed, that Narcan was apparently not given when law enforcement arrived on scene. Geraldine told us that while she could not know every possible thing about her daughter's life, She was very familiar with her health issues. She explained that Shawna managed several ongoing conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure and anxiety, had always been very wary of narcotics. Ultimately, Geraldine's concern here is not over a typo, not an isolation. That can happen in any field, even when people are trying their very best to get things right. She's more concerned, she said, about the sum total of the factors. What feels, to her, like a rushed investigation, the full autopsy that she'd expected that was not completed, the difficulty in communication, the delayed reports, and then an error. She wonders if there are possibilities of other errors along the way, too. That's why she and her family have been asking that the circumstances of Shawna's death be re-examined.
Trust and Will is an online estate planning service. Visit trustandwill.com for details.
Ooh, Trust and Will.
My dad and I were always close, but some things we just didn't talk about, like his will. After he was gone, we found out he didn't have one, and it created a lot of stress during a time of grief.
Creating a will can be hard to think about, but avoiding it can lead to greater difficulty for the people you love. That's why Trust and Will makes estate planning simple. Create a will online in as little as 30 minutes.
Now, I have a will in place to make sure my loved ones are protected. With Trust and Will, it was easy and affordable, and I got peace of mind knowing my wishes are clear.
Trust and Will.
Get 20% off when you visit trustandwill.com/future. That's trustandwill.com/future to get 20% off. trustandwill.com/future.
Darlene Gomez has been fighting for justice in missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives cases across New Mexico and the U.S. for more than 2 decades. When she first learned about Shawna's case, the details immediately raised red flags for her. As an attorney with extensive experience in federal, tribal, and state jurisdictions, she recognized patterns that she says she'd seen before, investigations that seemed to reach conclusions without fully examining the evidence families themselves had documented. We asked Darlene what specifically drew her to Shawna's case and what she saw that made her believe it warranted further investigation.
I most definitely was compelled to take on the case of Shawna Toya because of the fact that she had these little children that were dependent on her, and that the Toyas have such a fabulous reputation within the community. They are expert potters, and the fact that Shawna was with them earlier, she was bowling, she was happy, she had talked about, going to the grocery store and getting a cashier's check and paying her rent. I believe there's reason to believe her death was suspicious. For me, one of the biggest indicators that I thought this case should have been at least investigated was the fact that there was the ID of another woman in Shawna's vehicle, that there was empty grocery bags, that there was no money in that car, and the fact that Shawna had some other injuries as far as bruising to the face, her lip. And to me, that would be a possible sign of robbery. The fact that they didn't do any kind of inventory of the items in Shawna's vehicle, to me, that was also very interesting. The fact that if you see the body cam from the officers that day, they just basically walked around her for 5 minutes before anyone started CPR. To me, those are all red flags. And for me, it's like they initially went in just saying, okay, this Native American woman was, a victim of some other kind of death, and we're not even going to spend a few moments investigating it. They already had this predetermined view of what had occurred. This is a consistent pattern, It's very rare that you find law enforcement that is hitting the ground running and continuing to investigate. I think the cases where law enforcement are able to solve cases, that there's a witness who has seen the events and is willing to testify. Also, when the police get to the scene of the crime right away and start an active investigation. And generally, those are for injuries that are related to gun violence, stabbings, and violence through other objects. But I think one of the interesting parts of this case is because we were able to get so much media attention. And at the time I was on the New Mexico MMIWR task force, I was able to connect with the Second Judicial District Attorney here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who also accepted this case under the District Attorney's jurisdiction, and also the New Mexico Attorney General under Hector Balderas also picked up the case in hopes of trying to bring some closure to the family. But as people get out of office, and it almost seems like we're to the point today where it's completely stalled. Although we've been told the Bureau of Indian Affairs under their Murdered and Missing Unit is going to be investigating the case and is actually looking for the woman whose ID was in the vehicle. So I personally have not heard from any law enforcement agency in this case for probably over 2 years.
Based on what Geraldine told us, further investigation could explore connections between the ID's owner and Shawna, or, if the wallet was stolen, the circumstances of that theft. If there is a link, Darlene and the Toyas want it explored. Darlene says that she's not going to stop until that happens.
For me, the commitment stems in the fact that I have a friend who's been missing. It's going to be 25 years on St. Patrick's Day, and she went missing from the Hickory Apache Nation in Dulce, New Mexico. Her name is Melissa Ann Montoya. And for me, this is something that I feel God gave me these talents to work the federal, tribal, state government side of things. I've worked with numerous police departments. I've worked Indian country in my private practice for almost 23 years. And so I felt like God has put this on my plate, and it's almost my responsibility to help victims who have no voice. And so it's almost a part of who I am. And when you see the children crying, you see grandparents who are having to raise their loved ones' children, when you see the siblings, and when you see this injustice of families having no rights and victims having no rights, it breaks your heart. And for me, every time I work with a different family, I see certain patterns that are very consistent. So that can be lack of communication, lack of common courtesy, the lack of investigations, and it just goes on and on and on. And wherever I go throughout the United States, I see these same patterns. I'm starting to see different tribes and pueblos take an active effort to help bring justice for their loved ones, like Sac and Fox in Oklahoma. They've been consistently putting award money to MMIWR. They're putting billboards up. So tribes all over the country are starting to really play an active role in bringing justice to their tribal members, which I just have so much respect for those tribes. But then on the other hand, we have, say, the Navajo Nation, where I have about 21 cases, and I get zero support from the Navajo Nation as a whole. And for me, this is, something that I do to try to bring justice one family at a time, and also to bring the national attention to people outside of Indian country who have no idea about this genocide of Native American people. And then we look at these statistics for the men. The number of men who are murdered are probably about 65% of the rate women are murdered at. The fact that 1 in 2 Native American women will be victims of sexual assault. The numbers for women, Native American women suffering violent crimes is anywhere between 83% and 86%. And that's just what's reported. If you look at the data for murdered, missing Indigenous women and relatives, the data is lacking because so many of these nations are sovereign. A lot of the individuals, when they're classified into the National Crime Database, their race is misidentified. We currently do not identify anyone by tribal affiliation. So there's just all of these issues going on. And for me, it's trying to make the outside world understand that if we continue to allow perpetrators to kill our Native American men and women in Two-Spirit, that it's going to be genocide. And to me, I can't just sit back and let that happen. I just want people to know that Shawna Toya's family is very much like the makeup of your family. And I would just ask your listeners to think about what would happen if their daughter or their mom just all of a sudden died, and you know that there's these answers that you need, and those answers aren't being answered. The frustration, the sadness, the depression, the waking up every day, especially with her children. I know her son, every night he would go to sleep waiting for his mom to come home, and then waking up every morning knowing that she's not coming home, but because he's so young, he thinks that there's going to be this miracle and she's just going to come home. And for those children who are going to grow into adults and never know what really happened to their mom, and how does that affect them? How does it affect the community when they know that there's potentially a killer out there and nobody is searching for them? And one of the things that I would also like to mention is when you look at jurisdictions where there's Native American Indian reservations or pueblos, that the FBI has the only authority under the Major Crimes Act to investigate those cases. And we know that 60% of all cases that actually go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, that 60% get declined. And so if you know you're living amongst all these killers and murderers and they're never going to be arrested, what does that mean if you tell what you saw or what you know? You're virtually silenced because you are a sitting duck in your home if you tell on someone. Because the fact is, if you want to murder someone and get away with it, you do it in Indian country, because the police aren't going to spend their time looking for you. The police aren't going to investigate it fully. And so these families are just left there looking on their own, but also running the risk of being potential victims themselves. So I also want your listeners to think about that part, because so oftentimes when we live in cities and towns and states, the police come right away. They investigate crimes. But on Indian reservations, that doesn't happen. And I don't blame the police for that, but I blame the systematic failures, the lack of money that goes into our police forces, the fact that the FBI considers Indian country a hardship duty station. So we get all these young FBI agents who come in, they do their time, and they leave. Nobody is vested in these communities. And then our tribal police, oftentimes there's only a few of them on duty. And say the Navajo Nation, sometimes they only have, say, 10 officers to patrol a reservation that's the size of West Virginia. And so this is the reality of what the Toyas have to go through. And this is the reality of the people who live on Native lands. And just imagine if that was the world you lived in. What would you do to bring justice for your family in your community? And that's why I do what I do.
Without answers about Shawna's final hours, the Toya family say that they struggle to help her 4 children process the loss of their mother. But they've still put a lot of work into that for the sake of the kids. And one way that they've processed is through art.
Not knowing is what was the hardest thing ever. And trying to explain to them, just repeatedly the same thing, but then at the same time, it's not really registering in them because they can't understand, and all you could do is just cry with them. There's nothing else you can do but just look at them, and they're crying and you're crying, and along with them. And there's no words, at that moment in time. And even for myself, I didn't know how to take it in and, explain to myself what I was feeling, or why, everything was about why, why did this happen to us, or why did it happen to her? So when I see them create something, it just tells me what they're feeling at that moment in time when they're building. The 11-year-old one, when she was like about 8 years old, that was kind of their comfort zone too, is just working with the clay. I started noticing her making like kind of like monster figures, or, trying to, I guess maybe she's feeling bad or she's feeling scared, or, sometimes I question her about that, but she doesn't really say much about it, So I just go by how I feel, or I look at it and just go by what she's trying to say. They're realizing mommy's not coming home, we're not going to see her. But I always talk to them and tell her she's here, she's watching you, you just can't see her. She's probably laughing, with you every time you guys, feeling funny or goofy and stuff. She's probably there laughing with you. And I go through that as an adult. I still, every now and then it just hits me out of nowhere. And, I just stand up, go to the restroom, go to the room or somewhere just, to kind of hide my emotions at the time, because I don't want to make them feel what I feel. It is a process. Now that they're getting older, I can see their figures or their work is really, really getting better. A lot of things that Wilson and Shaylee built is more like happy things, like animals or figures that are happy. They're in the comfort zone where I want them to be now. They're accepting it and we're moving forward. She was that type of person that loved everyone, cared for everyone. She made everybody laugh. There was not a time where she came home and we didn't laugh about something. So she left a lot of memories, good memories. And there's, certain things when you're going somewhere or doing something, she pops up in your mind of what she did or what, what we laughed about. So that's why I tell the kids, you just know mom's still here because you can feel her. You can just talk about her all day if you wanted to. There's so much to talk about.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Geraldine told us that one of the most difficult things is seeing Shawna's children experience the lack of official response to the family's advocacy efforts.
But I'm still struggling. I'm still trying, I'm still advocating. We're still taking the kids out there. They kind of fall into that emotion where, Grandma, you haven't heard from anybody. No one told you anything yet. And, and then it makes you go back again to where the first time you felt this pain. And I don't know how to explain it sometimes. It's so hard. It's just hard, it's painful. And that's pretty much my case. And every day as I live, we have our grandkids pray. In our traditional world, we give thanks to the sun. When the sun comes up in the morning, we have we grind white corn to make our cornmeal and pray for another day given. So every morning before they go to school, they protect themselves before they walk out the house. They grab some cornmeal, put it in their right hand, say a prayer, put their mom in their prayer, look at the sun and feed the sun as they go for the day. And that's how we teach them, tell mom you're going to school now, tell her to be there with you, be beside you, help you to learn a lot. And I was telling them, just like me, I'm this old, I'm already a grandma, but I learn something new every day. And maybe what you learned today that maybe I didn't learn when I was your age, because everything has changed. Maybe you can teach me. I was telling them that. So be bright and smart and, get your learning done. And then if you need to teach me something, and if I need to, if I ask you something that I need to know, maybe you can help me. And be like, okay, Grandma, and end up going off to school all happy. Or like going to church on Sunday. They know that, when we first started comforting them, we'll tell them, your mom's our angel now. Let's go. We're going to Mass. You might not see her, but there'll be signs there that she is there. So there's been several experiences as we were in church, several times, whether seeing a spider walking by and then stopping at each one of them where they were sitting in the pew. And I said, there's Mommy. She's probably saying, hi, good morning.
Geraldine explained that another way of preserving Shawna's memory is through her pottery, and that the pieces that remain have become precious family heirlooms.
So the last pieces of her work is what we have today. And I tell them that whenever you guys move out, move on your own, have your own place, this is what you're going to have. And, so I have that stored safe for them. And, it was amazing how she made a turtle. And I have that right where her shrine is. But she made a turtle, and she had 4 baby turtles on top of the mama turtle. And so I put that there, and I prayed to her, and I said, okay, this is Tanaya, Walana, Wilson, and Shaylee. And you only had this one left, and there was a reason for that. So this is yours, I said. So I put it right where her picture is. But when I see my own work today after Shawna passed, it's like become even more like intricate, really a lot of detail. My emotions actually takes over. And then when it's done, I look at it and I end up putting this smile on me and says, Shawna, you helped me build this. Look at what we made. When we won those ribbons last weekend, I was just so overcome. I was like, oh my goodness. Yep. This is what can happen when you're feeling the way you feel at times, but then at the same time, it creates beauty. I'm just trying to keep the strength to keep moving forward, and hopefully somebody will hear me for answers. I mean, somebody that can help me get answers, because like I said, I've gone a long ways and still nothing, but I'm just praying on a daily basis. And every time I watch other shows, like 48 Hours, Datelines, I mean, there's years that have gone by and still they catch the person. And I'm hoping, with patience, hoping that, someday that'll be me, to find out. It's so hard, but I tell Ben, I think about it every day. And then when something pops up, I immediately get to it. I call, or try to reach out. I try to ask questions, and I try to call and find out, please let me have another step. Please, somebody just come up to me.
That's the biggest thing that Geraldine says she's looking for information. She believes that someone out there knows more about the circumstances of the evening of July 31st and the early morning hours of August 1st, 2021, and she hopes they'll come forward. For her part, Darlene explained that several ways people can support MMIWR and MMIP cases and the families who are fighting for justice and seeking answers. She encourages sharing social media posts about missing persons, following victims' families' pages, supporting messages, and attending local events. Since families receive no financial assistance until cases involve confirmed foul play, Darlene emphasizes donating directly to families for searches, for billboards, and for basic needs like food and gas. She also recommends supporting organizations like MMIWR Indian Country, Medicine Will Ride, and Mother Nation, noting that these groups need help with press releases, social media campaigns, and advocacy work. There are links to all of these organizations in our show notes, and we encourage you to support them. We've also included photos of some of the Toya's pottery on our social media so you can see their families' incredible work. If you have information that you feel could aid in a reinvestigation of Shawna Toya's death and the circumstances surrounding it, reach out to Darlene Gomez at the law offices of Darlene Gomez at dargomezlaw.com. That's dargomezlaw.com, or the Albuquerque Police Department at 505-843-STOP or STOP. We will be off next week and then return the week of December 3rd with our coverage of Eric Nellums, an Army veteran who was shot and killed outside his home in Alabama more than 20 years ago. His family has been fighting for answers ever since. If you know of a case that should be covered on the Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. Our therapy fund is paid for through Patreon and Apple Premium subscriptions. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes, as it really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcast, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so that you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is out everywhere now. Find out more through the link in our show notes. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laura Norton with interviews by Brooke Hargrove. It's engineered by Southern Gothic Media and Rachel Boyd. Content advisement is by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.